welcome. I'm going to, when I start the slideshow, I will go ahead and tell you more about myself. And let's see if I can get that started. Okay, so my presentation is called Writing as Justice. As I said before, welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I love talking to young people, but I especially think that it's powerful to talk to writers that are young people that are about to be writers or they're trying to pursue a creative field. So my presentation is called Writing as Justice. And before I get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Mireya. I'm a Latina artist, researcher, writer, and teacher. I grew up in the city of Almonte. And when I was growing up in the city of Almonte, it was a really racist place. And all of the teachers that I had in the school system were white. So that really made a big difference in my education. And my parents were immigrants from Mexico. And so they didn't have a lot of confidence here in the United States. They didn't feel quite settled. And they had a very specific idea of what it was supposed to mean for me to be a woman. And they thought that women were supposed to be pretty and that they were supposed to be good listeners and that they should do as they're told, and that most importantly, women were supposed to be quiet. And I was really shy as a young person, but even when I was a young woman, I was never the kind of person who was very good at staying quiet when I thought something unfair was happening. So I've always been a bit of a troublemaker. And let's see. Oh, and that's my bunny Butterscotch. So the collage is kind of like an explanation of the different things that I do. My artwork is over at the corner. And that's my bunny Butterscotch. We also have another bunny called Coco. And then sometimes when I'm kind of like processing things, like processing idea, I make little dolls. So the little doll that's over at the bottom corner is one of the ones that I've made. So what does justice mean? Today I'm going to be talking about ways that you can work towards justice as a writer. And I'm going to be speaking about two ways specifically. And let's go ahead and have a little bit of some interaction. What do you guys think justice means?
You want us to just speak or type it in?
Yeah, please just speak.
I view it as fairness.
Fairness? What else?
I can't think of anything.
Say that again, Jaden.
I can't think of something right now.
That's okay. It's okay to sit back and learn. Totally cool with that.
I would think that justice would be like used in like law, like terms, like.
Very good. Very good. I like the way that you connected those two ideas. That's a really good way to figure stuff out. Like if you know that the word justice is connected to law, then that's really important. That's a very powerful way to figure stuff out. Does anybody else want to say anything?
I like Cornell West's definition of justice, that justice is what love looks like in public.
I like that. Mm-hmm. I like that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and continue, and I'll give you guys a chance to talk later on as well. So when in this context, when I'm talking about justice, I mean social justice. And social justice is something that I've been working towards most of my life. I believe very strongly in fairness. But more than that, I think that everybody should be benefiting from the benefits of being an American, and that resources, opportunities, all of that should be open to everyone. So right here, I have a kind of like a short definition of social justice. It means equal rights, it means equal opportunities, equal treatment. And because of the kind of work that I do as a researcher, or that I've done as a researcher, I look at a lot at like mental illness and education. So I also believe very strongly that a lot of the times, and I'm going to use Mexican families as an example, the resources are there, but the Latinos don't know how to access those things. So I put equal access because I think that if you are a public school system, for example, and you are there to serve the public, but you're not making it easy for Mexican families to access resources, then you've got a big problem with unfairness. So I need you to stick with me for a second because these are numbers, and I know that numbers are not everybody's thing, but these are really important, and it matters to what I'm going to be talking about. So I'm begging you to kind of stick with me. So in the United States, about 76% of people are white, and about 13.4 are Black, and about 18.5 are Latino, and those are the biggest populations. Then we have Asian at 5.6%. But in the United States, our US Congress is 90% white, the governors are 96% white, the president and the vice president are 100% white. The people who decide what you're gonna watch on TV, 93% white. People who decide which books we read, 90% white. People who decide which news is being covered, 85% white. And people who decide which music is produced, 95% white. And the teachers in the United States as a whole, if you look across all the United States, and I'm not talking about like in your city, because your city might be a little bit different, but overall US teachers are 82% white. And full-time college professors are 84% white. And this really matters because as you know, I'm going to be talking about writing today. And so it's a real shame that 81.3% of authors and writers are white, and that there hasn't been a lot of space for other voices in this. So if you look back at the statistic that I talked about before, at the numbers that I talked about before, who's getting to choose your entertainment? TVs, books, news, music, all that is being chosen by white people. And that might not be cool with you. And you might be fine with it. You might be like, well, you know, I choose the shows that I watch and I just kind of pick through them, and that's great. But you are being impacted by who's getting to be in charge of your entertainment and whose voices get to be heard in the United States. So the dominant narrative, and by narrative, I mean the dominant stories that are being told in the United States, is white. They're cis male. So cis male is like when you know that your outside matches the inside of you, like you feel like a boy on the outside and you also feel like a boy on the inside, and those two match. So that's not the case for everybody. So I wanted to point that out. And the dominant narrative is also straight and middle class. So what we have here is people saying that the United States is white guys that identify as male, that are straight and are middle class. And I don't see the United States that way. The story of the United States isn't only white. The US is rich and diverse, and it's currently undergoing a rejection of polarities. And when I say polarities, I mean that there are people that are deciding that female and male aren't how they define themselves. And so they probably have like different ways that they identify or how they feel about who they are inside and whether or not that matches their outside, but they're going by the term non-binary. So that's really important too. If you're speaking to people as if everybody is white, then you're not really getting across the narratives of other people in the United States, and those people really matter. So So it's the voices of these others that really need to be stressed, and they really need to be elevated. And elevated means like being brought to the front, because we already have a lot of white voices. It's not that they don't matter, it's that we have a lot of them. So why does writing matter? Well, writing matters because writers are dangerous people. And we're going to be talking a little bit about why writers are dangerous people. But I'm going to go ahead and we're going to be talking about two ways that writers are dangerous people. And I put down, I found a couple of quotes. Writers are dangerous people. This is by Nikita Gill, and she says, never take a writer for granted. They're snipers armed with words. They know how to aim with sentences, how to fire with paragraphs, and how to immortalize their kills in verse. And I have to tell you that as a writer, when I'm really annoyed at somebody, I will write about them. And also the other reason that writers are really important is that right now our government is going through a big change, and dictatorship and authentic literature are not compatible. The writer is the natural enemy of the dictatorship. And I'm going to be showing you some examples about how that's been carrying out in the United States. So I went through the internet, and I know that you guys probably know that there's a lot of riots happening in the United States. There's a lot happening in Los Angeles, and there's a lot happening in Portland. And these are some photographs of the riots that are happening in Portland. And the woman that's sitting there is a journalist, and she was hit by gas and probably was hurt in other ways. And this is another example that was taken by a journalist of what they could see happening. And there's a problem with this because journalists usually, who are writers, don't usually get injured during riots. They might get injured accidentally, but in this particular administration, they're actually aiming at the writers. So I know a couple of writers that have lost eyes, and many of them have been really badly injured. There's a writer that I know that writes for KPCC who was hit on the neck, and he had this huge, huge bruise, and he wasn't doing very well. So as I was saying, writers usually don't get injured during riots unless it's an accident. Typically, journalists don't have to worry about the police and the military aiming at them. They wear vests that announce that they're journalists, and this protects them. But it's different. It's a different matter through this administration. So uncovering the truth is one way that you can challenge unfairness in this country. So by being a journalist and pointing out the things that your country is, that you feel your country is doing wrong, or by speaking out on behalf of the person that maybe isn't getting heard, is one way that you can fight justice fight for justice as a writer. But there's one other way. So one of the reasons that writing matters is because it tells a story of what it means to be human. And that's really important, because if we have only stories about white people that are straight and cis and middle class, then that means that 80 whatever of those stories are the ones that we're hearing. 82% of those stories are the ones that we're hearing. But there's this other percentage, this small percentage of other people that we're not hearing from. And as you know, like, other voices matter. Latino voices matter, Black voices matter, LGBT voices matter. All of those are really important to add to the narrative of what it means to be an American. So because we're talking about humanity, what does it mean for you to be human? Do you guys want to jump in and answer? What do you think it means to be human?
I will answer just to get the ball rolling. I think it means to have many different kinds of feelings, to be part of a community with others, to have the ability to think and reason things out that maybe not everybody has.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to jump in and talk about what they feel it means to be human? Okay, so I made this kind of like bubble chart that talks about writing is about sharing your internal narrative, and your internal narrative are your stories that you kind of keep inside of you, and they include how you see yourself, how you talk about yourself, who it is that you feel you are inside. And a lot of us don't always share that out, we keep those inside. So what does the human experience include? And in these instances, we're talking about class, and class is not like what grade level you're at. It means like, are you poor? Are you doing pretty well? Is that impacting your human experience? And then ethnicity, what's your ethnicity? Are you Latino? Are you Jewish? How does that change or affect the way that you see yourself? And how does that change the way that you see the world? And if you have a disability or an illness, I do a lot of work with special needs kids. And so my son happens to have autism. And so I'm really a big advocate on trying to make sure that the stories of people that are on the spectrum get heard, and that they share the same benefits that other people get to experience. So think about what it means for you to be human. How do you love others? What loss and pain have you gone through? What does finding love look like for you? And how you identify changes how you answer these questions? So if you are Black, how might that change because you are Black? If you're Latino, how might that change because you are Latino? How is what you look like and who you are changing your experience with spirituality and with love and with illness? And one of the groups of people that we don't have a lot of stories for are Native Americans. And so we have Native Americans in this country, but they don't often write because they don't often trust us enough to write and get their work published. And it's the same thing for a lot of other cultures. So it's really important to create a safe space where this can actually happen. Everybody's story is important, but because we have so many white, cis, male, straight stories already, we need to hear more from Black writers, LGBTQIA writers, trans writers, Native American writers, non-binary writers, and writers with autism, as well as other people that don't often get represented. So every voice matters. And so it's really, every voice matters. Every time that you write as a minority, every time that you speak out as a person of color, every time that you speak out as a person that doesn't have education, every time you write, that's a rebellious political act, because that's not what's happening in the United States, and that's not what most people want to happen. So every time that you show up for yourself and you write something down, then you are already being a huge part of what it means to enact social justice in this country. So for myself, for example, I do a lot of writing about social justice specifically. And so I'll talk about the rights of people with autism. I'll talk about the rights of people with like mental illness, or I'll talk about what it's like for people to go through mental illness, trying to figure out what it means to be in the United States when you're not from this country. And so anytime I write something that has to do with what's not in the typical narrative or in the typical stories that are being told about the United States, I'm already doing something really good for justice because I'm making those stories heard. So don't give up. Help minority. So a lot of us help each other. A lot of minority and underrepresented writers and other writers whose voices are traditionally silenced, we help each other. So help other writers, make sure that you make room for them. If other people are not making room for them and you are in a position of power to make room for them, make room for them. And what that means is that if you are speaking to, if you, for example, have a book out or you have an essay that you're speaking, that you're gonna get to read to a bunch of people, then if you have a choice about who else gets to be on there with you, choose somebody who might not be chosen otherwise. So I often make room for my friends. I often make room for other people that I love to also be on stage with me if I get to be on stage. But also if I'm in an opportunity to recommend which writers I would like to work for a certain place or for a certain magazine, then I try to choose writers that are also marginalized and underrepresented, who don't often get to be in the front. Fight for your right to fight, and fight for your right to write, and fight for your right to be heard, and make sure that you represent. And I'll take questions if you guys have questions. That's it for my presentation.
Thank you so much. That was so wonderful. And
Thank you.
I know it's hard sometimes to come up with a question, but think about this as an opportunity to get answers from someone who's been doing this work for a long time and who knows what it's like to write and struggle to be successful and then also have some success, especially if you are hoping to be a writer yourself. So you can also chat the question if you're too shy to talk it, and I will read it for you. So let's think about if we could just ask one question. What would we ask her?
Thank you, Jordan.
Just give it a second. Something will percolate.
No problem.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Gabriella. You go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Do you have some writers from different groups, right, to recommend, or even like something like I heard, Latino, right, speaking about that. So if you can have some Latino writers, some Black writers, some Asian writers who write for social justice, because I haven't, heard that, and that's often a narrative you don't kind of hear about or see. So yeah, do you have any recommendations?
I do. So I'm putting together a reading for tonight. Being a writer can be kind of lonely because you often are at home writing by yourself. And especially right now that we're in a pandemic, I don't get to hang out with my friends. So I joined somebody who was presenting a reading, and he put up a topic and he invited all these writers on Zoom to just read out their work. And it just felt so good. So because of that, it launched me into wanting to do my own reading, right? And so I really wanted to do, to host and to help other readers get heard and get visibility. And so there's this nonprofit called the Noshona. It's the and then NASIONA. They do all social justice work. So what they do is that they choose. So they're the people that published my book, And so all of the stories that come out of there, and they also have a podcast that's also amazing. They talk about things that maybe you don't get to hear very often. They have a couple of, I know that there's a couple of Asian writers on there that are doing some amazing work, like Linda Trin and Jennifer. I'm not going to remember Jennifer's name though, but they talk about topics that are pretty heavy. And so if you want to use that in your classroom, I would definitely read it through and find out whether it's appropriate for my students. But they talk about things like what it's like to have your name always mispronounced. There's one gentleman that has this story on there that says, "My name is Juan." And it sounds like a very simple concept, because he's just trying to get everybody to remember that his name is Juan, but everybody keeps calling him Jose. And so, as you can imagine, that's very hurtful and it's very dismissive, and it feels to them like they don't matter. It feels to this person like he doesn't matter. Like, you're not even seeing me. You just think that I'm a type of person. And so those kind of stories you can get through there. And he also does a really great podcast that you can also listen. Like if you have, if you're a teacher, for example, and you want your kids to have more access to audio, a way to learn auditorily through the ears, then that works too. And there's also a bunch of slam poets on YouTube that you can look up. And they're doing some amazing work with the slam poetry. And slam poetry is really great for the classroom because a lot of the times the topic is very, very direct, and it's something they feel very passionate about. And because it's a slam poetry, it's not 30 minutes, you know, it's like 10 minutes or whatever. And you get across a message that's really, really strong and very succinct, but very direct. And it's a great for learning. But Gabriela, if you want, I can have Jordan share my email, and I'm happy to put together a list for you.
Do you want me to put your email
Thank
in the
you.
chat so people can have
Yes,
it?
please.
Okay, and
Can
we
you?
actually, I will. We've got a few questions that came through in the chat. So
Okay, cool.
let's see here. Justin wanted to know the names of your books. And
Oh, okay. So I have one book out. It's called Vestiges of Courage. And vestiges means like traces of courage. And it's kind of about my childhood and what it was like to grow up in this very racist city with not a lot of opportunities. And it's kind of a grown-up read. So if you're going to read it for your classroom, make sure that you kind of vet out the stories to make sure that they're appropriate for you. But one of the things that I talk about quite a bit is what it's like to be. So my son has autism, so I talk about that a lot. But one of the things about autism is that with my son specifically, he had a selective mutism. So he didn't really have a physical reason why he couldn't speak, but he couldn't speak. So he very rarely spoke to me. And I talk about what it's like to live and love somebody that is choosing or unable to talk to you. And I talk about my work also in special needs centers, because I did some work in special needs centers and what that was like and what communication means when you're not using your voice anymore.
there's another question that might kind of dovetail off this, and then I'll go back to some others. So Noe asks, can you talk about your experience as a Latino woman trying to get published?
Oh God. So I'm going to tell you what it is. I did this panel with a couple of other Latino writers, and I'll tell you what we discussed there. So I did this panel with a few other writers, and we all talked about what it was like to be Latina and trying to get published. And of course, it's really, really hard. But not impossible, but it is hard. And part of the reason that it's so hard is because they try to make your stories more appealing for a white audience. So they will say things like, oh, your particular story isn't going to appeal to our white audience, which is the biggest audience. So we're going to go ahead and ask you to take these things out because they might upset people, or take these things out because they don't appeal to the audience that we have. And so you have to really think about like who you want to be, and how you want to come across as an artist or a writer, because that's really, to me, that's really important. Like, I'm not willing to compromise on certain things. Like, I'm not willing to say that I'm not willing to say that it's not okay for immigrants to come here illegally. Like, that's one of those topics that I know is really hard for a lot of people, but it's something that I believe very strongly in. I believe hope should be for everybody, and that for some people, coming illegally to the United States is the way that they find hope.
Okay, let's see here. Next question. That's a great answer, by the way.
Thank you.
From Dan, it seems like you've embraced writing throughout your life. When you were a younger person, how did you find the energy and motivation to keep writing when those around you discounted or discouraged you? Great question.
Well, Dan's my husband. So of course he would ask that. So Dan knows me very well. And Dan, by the way, shout out to Dan. Dan's my editor. He's the first person that looks at any of my work. He's amazing at editing. But Dan knows that I grew up in a household where, so I grew up in a very traditional household where there were a lot of, where my parents were Catholic, but they were not American Catholic. They were old school Mexican Catholic, which means that you covered your head when you went to church. It means that there was no work done on Sundays, no work, none. All you did was pray and go to church. And so they had really old-fashioned ideas, or very traditional ideas, about what a woman's role was supposed to look like and what it was that we were supposed to be, what I was supposed to be like. And I was such a tomboy. So it was already really hard for my parents that I wasn't going to sit around and embroider, because my grandmother tried to teach me how to embroider, and that didn't go very well. And so I was like a tree climbing girl. And so I often got in trouble for that. But I think one of the reasons that Dan is asking is because reading was not allowed in my household. So I really had to fight a lot to be able to read. And I know that you're probably thinking, who doesn't allow reading? I'll tell you who doesn't allow reading. Families who don't want their daughters to get ideas. And so reading was discouraged in my family. Like, one book was fine, a couple of books was fine, but I was a really, really hungry reader. And so one of the things that I did to stay afloat in a family that I didn't fit into, because I didn't fit in, was I did a lot of reading, I did a lot of writing, and I made a lot of art. So I guess one of the ways that I stayed motivated to write is because I kind of needed it for my survival. Like, I couldn't be in a family like the one that I was in without finding a way to let things out. And writing is a wonderful way to express who you are and to talk about your ideas. And these were ideas that I couldn't share with my family. So that was great. But also, I've always kind of been like, not very much of a rule follower. So in my family, there was a lot of rules. And one of the ways that I stayed motivated and kept afloat and made sure that I was okay was by doing acts of defiance, like being creative and writing and making art And these were not things that my family approved of, but they were things that I needed to survive. So I guess in my instance, my parents might say she was very disobedient and she was doing all these things like writing when she wasn't supposed to, or reading when she wasn't allowed to. But I really needed those things. And I don't think that they're bad things. I think my parents just had really old-fashioned ideas.
That
Thank you,
makes
Dan.
sense. Good question. I have a question, I'm trying to formulate it. For students who might be, identifying as white, we do, of course, want to make sure that their voices matter too, but is there anything you might say to them that about topics they might consider writing about, perhaps, that they've never explored before, or ways to be a writer as a white person who is also keeping social justice in mind, but through your own writing, or I don't know, any kind of advice or tips for that?
No, that's a really good question, because I'm not discouraging people that are white to write, of course. So, I mean, some amazing writers that have come out of like war-torn countries talk about justice and empathy and the way that they see the world. And I think that we need more of that. And for sure, I'm trying to think if I could think of any specific writers that speak to some of these things. But oh, I have a good friend who talks about what mental illness is like. And so that's really important. So I guess one of the things that I would say, and I'm going to go back on my slides a little bit, is that a lot of the times you're not just one ethnicity, you're not just one belief system, you're not just, people are really complicated. And so you could be white and LGBTIQ, right? You're not just one thing. We're not just one thing. And so it's really important to try to like grab from those experiences and share them. And I mean, if you have mental illness or autism, then I would like love to see more narratives about that and how people process what's that like for them. And I guess this is a little controversial, but I'll go ahead and say it anyway. Talk about what it's like to be a white person going through races, like the racism of other people. Like, talk about what it's like to be you as a witness to other people's pain. Talk about what it's like to have special needs children. Talk about, just because you are a white writer doesn't mean that these topics are off the table for you. It just means that you need to write about them in such a way that you are sensitive. You want to be sensitive. You want to make sure that you have Black readers or Latino readers or LGBTQIA readers to look through your work so that you're not saying something stupid. But for sure, I would say that every voice matters. I would hate to discourage a Stephen King from doing their work, or a great journalist from doing their work just because of their race. I don't think that should be the case either. I think it's really wonderful that there are so many opportunities for white people, and I don't want to take that away from them. Like, I just want more opportunities for the rest of us too.
Yes, very important point. And I also wasn't trying to make the point that like, oh, the poor white writer,
Oh, no. And I have to say that a lot of my white writer friends have helped my writing. So I have a lot of white writer friends, because I find especially the women to be very generous and loving, and they really make a lot of space for other people.
That's good.
Yeah.
Also, Gabriela left a couple comments. First of all, a recommendation for white writers to listen to a podcast by Resmaa Menakem, who's a wonderful author, called Notice the Rage, Notice the Silence. And she put a link to the interview he did with Krista Tippett at On Being podcast. And then she had a question for you. Did you think you would be a writer as a youth?
I had fantasies of being a writer as a youth. So no, I didn't think that I was going to necessarily be a writer. I studied to be a teacher, And I picked a career that was very safe, and that would be relatively, not that I'm saying that being a teacher isn't hard, because it is hard, but it was a career that was safe and acceptable to my family. And so it wouldn't have been, I think that if I had been born under different circumstances, teaching might not have been necessarily my first choice, but that's what I went with. And so on the other hand, teaching led me to research. And in research, you have to be mouthy. You have to tell, so I work with organizations like Kaiser Permanente, where I've had to tell them, you're not doing enough for your Latino families. You're not doing enough for your Black families. And this is what you need to do. And they'll tell you, no, you're wrong. And then you have to tell them no, and you have to go back and you have to push. But no, I don't think that so the American dream doesn't work the same way for immigrants, right? We don't think of the American dream in the same way that everybody else thinks of it. And so I figured my expectations were not pie in the sky. And I kind of wish that they had been. Like, I wish that I would have been in a position where I would have said, I want to be an artist, and I don't care what anybody says. I also want to be a writer, and I can do both of those things. But the way I was brought up really affected me, and it took me a really long time to kind of push past that. Thank you, Gabriela, for your question.
And then Heather has a question for you. She's going to ask herself.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation, and I really enjoy what you've shared. I wanted to know, and you may have already touched on this a bit, how writing has been therapeutic for you. You talked a bit about mental health and mental illness, and if it's helped you to, process anything in your life, if you've used it to journal or with some of your books or professional writing, if that's been therapeutic for you. Just kind of wondering how you've tied in your own personal and professional writing to mental health and well-being.
Great question. So I actually had, so I went to Antioch University to learn about writing, and I have a really good professor and mentor there that recently went to a conference that was about trauma. And it was about physical trauma and the kind of things people go through when they're going through war. And this was a conference where he was the only writer, and everybody else was a doctor or a therapist or some other kind of medical profession, and he was the only writer. And I actually did my my thesis, my master's presentation on how writing transforms trauma. And so I had this conversation with this professor, and he talked about how during this presentation, he got up and he got to speak, I guess, as a writer. And he talked about how writing does this really different thing for your brain, because when you have trauma, when you have physical and or emotional pain, you often have you get flashes of memories, right? And those are not organized. You have pictures of this happening here, pictures of that happening here, and you just get little flashes. They're called backflashes?
Flashbacks, yeah.
Flashbacks, thank you.
Yeah.
Flashbacks. And so you have these experiences, and a lot of the times they come as like really powerful emotions all at once, and you don't understand where they're coming from. And there's actually studies that show that if you have gone through trauma, and if you could chronologically write it out, it actually helps a lot. And like I was saying before, I was doing some work with Kaiser, and one of the things that came out of that, or me working, going through the paperwork and doing all this, is that they were doing this work on this study called the ACE score. and there's this ACE study, and there are adverse childhood experiences, and it's like 10 questions, and they score you out of 10 questions, and the higher you get, the more messed up you are, right? So they look at things like loss and abuse and availability of parents. Were your parents there? Were they divorced? They look at all of this different stuff. And what they found was that in instances where the people were asked to write about their experiences, they had these really specific outcomes. So when you have lots and lots of trauma, there's actually things that it does to your body. So it will, you'll have higher blood pressure. You will have a lot, for women, a lot of the times, different kinds of cancer. Women actually have like higher incidence of breast cancer and breast cancer. And so there's all of these things that are tied in to the pain that you have kind of like gulped down. And so if you're able to write it down, if you're able to put it in order, your blood pressure improves, and you actually feel less stress, you feel happier, your cognition improves. And there was one other thing that I wanted to mention. Your cognition improves, but also, I'm not going to remember what it is, but there was one other bit. Oh, yes, you live longer. So if your ACE score is high, like so the questions are like yes or no. There's 10 questions, yes or no. And I know people that score 10s on those. And if you score anything higher than like an 8, then you will live 25 years less than what you were meant to live. Like your trauma, your pain, all of that lowers your life expectancy. And there's a bunch of other things that are connected to that. Like, people that have a lot of trauma have trouble holding down a job. A lot of the times you have a lot of mental illness and all of that stuff. And so that piles on, and your life expectancy is lowered by as much as 25 years. And so if you are able to write, then you are able to heal that part of yourself. And that is, to me, that's like revolutionary. Like, I feel like writing helped me so much. And I wasn't always, it felt good, right? But I don't think I really realized the impact until I was older.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for that.
That's great. Great answer. So I think we're going to wind down the questions because I want to have an opportunity to, one of our board members would like to talk about another exciting upcoming Literary Legacies project we have that's actually really tied in some ways to the content of what you've been talking about today, Mireya. So I really love the synergy. So I'm going to let our Kay Aurora say a few words. For the kids who are still here, this is another opportunity where you might be able to get published. So go ahead, Kay.
Hi, Mireya. I want to talk about our new project, but first I want to thank you for your talk. And it gives me a lot of courage when you said that you write in a way that's not how other people see you, but how you want to be seen. And it takes courage to challenge that norm of whiteness that people want to read you through. So I just want to know what gives you that courage.
I grew up in a really negative household environment. It wasn't like, I'm talking about how there was expectations of what I was supposed to be like as a girl, but there was a lot of other kinds of abuse going on in my household. And so I think that there's two things that happen when people go through something really hard like that. They leave with a lot of insecurities, but I thankfully had therapy. So it gave me the opportunity to find out a lot about myself. And one of the things that I found out about myself is that I don't break, it doesn't break me or make me if people don't like me. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not fixed on whether or not somebody else approves of what I'm doing.
That's great. That's great. So our new project, like Jordan says, ties into some of the things you're saying about writing about justice. We're starting an anthology with youth writing about how they want to see themselves, their identity in terms of race and gender. And so the project is located in Morgan Hill, Chicago, and New York so far, but we're opening it up to anyone, anywhere, all over the world who wants to write about their identity. And we're looking for stories that haven't been told. And so the book is going to be titled We See Ourselves, because we want to hear from youth, particularly high schoolers, how they want to be seen, not how the world sees them. So when we think about racism, it's usually somebody putting a stereotype on us and saying, this is how I see you. When we want to say, that's not me, that's not how I see myself. Or when you're a girl and somebody says, you can't do this because you're a girl, we want to say, no, I can fly. So these are the kinds of things we want to hear from youth about. So like some questions we might have are like, how does Black Lives Matter affect you? How does racism and sexism on social media affect you? What do you want to say back to people who have all these stereotypes about you? So to get started, we have a webinar just like this one, where writer and mentor Anushka Singh is going to talk about writing as empowerment. And it's November 14th. It's 4 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, and 1 p.m. Pacific. And she's going to take you through how to write that kind of story, how to write about your identity, how to have the courage to write. And so we hope you'll join us. At the end of that webinar, there will be a link to fill out an application to write for the anthology. So we want to hear all kinds of diverse voices. We want to hear your voice and have that be in our book. And just remember that Literary Legacies, our organization, is unique because we pair students with mentors, and the mentors will get you started, get to know you, brainstorm with you, and they'll take your idea all the way to publication. So we're looking forward to working with you, and we hope you'll join our webinar on November 14th. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay. And I want to give a big round of applause to Mireya for this excellent presentation. And thank you so much for your time. And I also just wanted to ask David if you had any words you wanted to say about Literary Legacies. That's David Chappelle is our president, founder. Without him, it would not exist.
Ooh, president.
I
Kids
just want
love
to
him.
say, yeah, the kids, kids love me, I guess. I am so grateful for you, Mireya, for your time speaking to all of us, not just young people, but the adults here as well. So a quick history lesson about Literary Legacies, which you may find interesting, was that I suffered very seriously from a very serious mental illness in 2009 to 2010, and I continue to struggle with it for up to this day. But in 2012, I was in the psych ward at Sanford Hospital, and I decided to write about what was going on in my brain as a way to kind of find healing and purpose, and to kind of get me over the hump of continuing to be in this downward spiral. So I wrote my first novel called Age of the Great Prophets, and it was a release. I ended up writing about my three different identities: my health issues, my ethnic identity, and my religious identity, my spiritual identity. And I conveyed these three things through three different main characters. So I just want to let you know that all the research that you said, and I know you've experienced this yourself, but like it could be no more true of myself. It could be no more true of Literary Legacies, because that is where we are born from. We are born from me going through a very serious trauma, and me writing as a way to find a healing from it. So yeah. And I just want to say thank you for everybody who was able to come today. If any young people would like to sign up to learn more about the anthology project, please go to that Eventbrite link, or you can email myself or Kay at the emails that I listed in the chat room. Yeah, we are going to be expanding Chicago very soon. So all the Chicago young people know that we're going to be here. We're going to be coming here soon with direct one-on-one mentoring and partnerships here. I want to thank SGA Youth and Miss Martinez for being here as well. And any of the SGA Youth who are here. I want to thank the board member who came as well. And yeah, I appreciate everybody taking time out of your Saturday to come support Literary Legacies and support Mireya, and to further the cause of writing for not just young people, but for all of us. And I specifically want to thank Jaden and Justin. I was going to call you guys out and see if you guys had any comments, but I'm going to spare you all that, because I see Jaden's playing with his little thing right now, so I'm just gonna leave him alone. So I will pass the mic back to Jordan, and just want to say thank you.
Thank you, David. Thanks everyone again. Mireya, we're so grateful. And we have in December, so November, we have our anthology project in that webinar. And in December, we're going to have 2 other speakers coming. We're going to have Stephen Dunn, who is a poet and a prose writer, excellent guy. And Anjali and Jetty, who has a new novel out and a collection of essays, and is also they're just all great people. So we hope that you'll stick around. We'll give you the titles and stuff as they come. We haven't quite gotten there. So thanks everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. This will be made available as a recording, and I will actually just send it out to anyone who registered, and you can review it. All right.
Bye,
Thank you,
Mr.
Jordan.
President.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Bye, you guys. Take care.
Bye,
Bye.
David.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
See you. Bye.